Elder Sign was designed by Richard Launius and Kevin Wilson and published by Fantasy Flight Games as a cooperative dice game where the players take the roles of investigators racing against the clock to stop the Ancient One from devouring the world. Armed with your tools, your allies, and your occult knowledge, you will put your sanity and your stamina to the test as you adventure through the mysterious museum in an attempt to gather the Elder Signs that you will need to seal the Ancient One away and keep it from entering the world. There's a lot of people who are referring to Elder Sign as basically the dice game version or a spin-off of another game called Arkham Horror. Now, I've not played Arkham Horror yet, but I do know that most of the time whenever you were to make a spin-off of something, it doesn't work. Is that the case here? Let's find out. The theme that this game is going for of adventuring through the museum as investigators, trying to resolve the various encounters that you find in the museum, defeating creatures and hunting for the Elder Signs to stop the Ancient One from entering the world, is mostly pasted on. Now I say mostly pasted on because the game does try its best to bring the theme out through various elements of it, like the adventure cards and the otherworldly cards and the monster tokens. All those have some extra text on them that kind of gives you a little bit of a description of what's going on in those rooms or in the world, or how the monster is supposed to be acting. And that's all good and all, but it doesn't, mechanisms wise, really give any connection to what the game is going through. It's more of just adding some flavor to it, which is good and all, but that doesn't really equate to being thematic. Another thing that the game does try to bring out its theme through is through the use of the abilities on the Ancient Ones. There are a couple of Ancient Ones, for example, Azathoth, which is just absolute destruction, and when he awakens, the world just ends. That's it. You don't even get to fight him. And considering the creature of Azathoth, if you know from Lovecraft's lore, that kind of makes sense. And the similar thing goes with Cthulhu, where he is all about madness. And so his ability is reducing your maximum sanity. And so, again, that would make sense. And some of the other ones may have some connections to how they are in Lovecraft's lore. If I knew the lore of these creatures a little bit better, maybe their abilities would match up better too, and maybe it would be more thematic that way. But as I think about it right now, I don't really see, apart from Azathoth and Cthulhu, I don't really see any connections between the abilities of the Ancient Ones and their abilities. I also don't see any real connections mechanisms-wise with the characters. All the characters just seem like they're just a character with a special ability that just helps them along the way, and they have a couple items they start with, and they have certain stats that they start with. The only mechanisms thing that actually makes sense to me, and this is kind of a stretch, is when you just discard a card that has an item on it, like the yellow die or the red die, is the equivalent of bringing that item with you while trying to resolve the encounter. Or discarding a spell card is the equivalent of you casting a spell. But that's kind of a stretch. Other than that, it's really a pasted on thing. I never felt like in any of the games that I played, I felt like that I was traveling through the museum, encountering the different rooms, finding out what's going on there, trying to resolve what's going on there, and in the other worlds rather, and trying to fight monsters, or trying to just figure out what's going on to try to find the Elder Signs. Apart from the discarding of the item cards, it really is just a pasted on thing with some good flavor to add to it, but it doesn't add theme to it. It really is just pasted on. At best, it's very thin. In terms of the component quality, I think it is fantastic. The dice, for starters, are great. The faces of the dice are deeply engraved, which means they are not going to fade away as quickly as you play through the game, handling the dice to roll them. They are etched into the dice so that they will last so much longer, which is always a plus. I also am very happy that they made the faces of the dice very distinct from each other, so it's easy to tell which face is which, and you don't have to worry about accidentally confusing one face with another. And something I found interesting but made me very happy was on the yellow die, they decided to, instead of filling in the engraved faces with white like the other dice to make them consistent, they filled it in with black to make it easier to see, which is such a great decision. That shows that they care more about being able to actually use the components easily rather than just making everything look consistent. A similar thing goes for the tokens. They are all fairly thick, so you shouldn't have to worry too much about bending them or breaking them while you're handling the tokens during the game. They all have a very distinct shape from each other, so you don't need to worry about accidentally confusing, say, a Doom token for another sign or a Clue token for a stamina. They all are very distinct, which is great. The one thing that could potentially find some people in some confusion that I found is some of these symbols that are on the front faces of the monster tokens, because the monster tokens themselves all have various symbols that will show up on the dice, but they're all fairly small, and some of the monsters even have double face slots for the symbols, meaning there are two symbols sharing one slot on the monster token. That could potentially cause some people to have some difficulty seeing what symbol is on what, especially the terror symbol, because a terror symbol is sort of green, but the front face of the monster token is also for the most part green. So if you are somebody who could have some sight issues, then you could have a risk of the terror symbol fading into the background of some of these monster tokens. But that really is the one thing that I found that could cause some issues in terms of the tokens themselves. Otherwise, the tokens are fantastic. Speaking of the symbology, apart from the occasional monster token, the symbology overall is actually really good. The symbols are very distinct from each other, so you don't need to worry about, is this a terror or is this a skull, is this a scroll? They all have their very distinct shapes, and they are very well printed out on all of the cards, the adventure cards, the otherworldly cards, and even on the ancient ones themselves, which I'd also like to point out, the ancient ones, the worldly cards, the adventure cards, and the character cards, they're all very well done. They are laid out very nicely. There's nothing that's really blending in with each other to cause any confusion that I've seen. There's also a great layout of the entrance sheet. It is clearly marked. There are 3 just distinct columns, and each of them has a very good set of text that describes what all you can do on the entrance sheet. Similarly with the character cards, it explains very clearly. The text on the character cards is very clear. You shouldn't have any issues with reading that, or with the text shown on the Ancient Ones cards. The caveat being that it could be possible to get confused on how many Doom tokens are supposed to go on the Ancient Ones card before it can awaken, because the Ancient One cards have this dark green background where you put all of the the Doom tokens, kind of like on the monsters. And the Doom tokens themselves, they're pretty darkly colored, which I guess makes sense, it's Doom. But because the Doom tokens and even the monster symbols are all darkly colored, if you have issues with seeing, you could easily end up having them fade into the background of the Ancient One cards and have a difficult time telling how many Doom tokens are required for this Ancient One to awaken. The assistance cards also are laid out very well. They have some good readable text, so you shouldn't have issues with that. Same with the symbology. They are all very distinct from each other. And then lastly, the clock itself is fantastic. The hand that is on the clock spins very nicely, and it holds its position very well when you don't need to spin it, so you don't need to worry about accidentally knocking it out of place if you were to bump the clock. The one thing is, you do have to assemble the clock when you first get the game. It comes completely separated. All the parts that are needed to build the clock are there, but you do need to assemble it in order to use it. Thankfully, however, the rulebook has very clear instructions on how to assemble the clock, and the best part is, once you do assemble the clock, you do not have to disassemble it between each game. It can fit in the box fully assembled, which is fantastic. Overall, besides the possibility of having some issues with seeing some of the symbols on some of the cards, the monster tokens and the Doom or the Ancient One tracks with the Doom tokens, but apart from that, the component quality is fantastic. In terms of how easy the game is to learn and to play, it's not too hard to learn at all. The rulebook is fantastically done. It has a great setup diagram with great instructions that show everything you need to do in order to set up the game correctly, with a great diagram like I just said. It's showing how the game should look when it's fully set up. It has diagrams of the anatomies for the various cards that you need to know about, and the anatomies are very distinct, they're very clear. It's easy to tell what parts of the cards are what from each other, as well as the symbols that you are going to encounter on both the cards themselves and the tokens themselves, monster tokens specifically. And it even has a good reference sheet on the back, so where if you do have any questions about what symbol is what and what it means, you don't have to go through the rulebook trying to find the symbol that you're looking for. It's on the back of the rulebook that you can quickly look at and figure out which one, what the symbol means, which is always fantastic. It also has a detailed description, but not too difficult description, with diagrams explaining how the different actions for the game are played out, how you move, how you resolve your tasks, and what you do after your tasks, and battling the Ancient One, and all of the sort. It explains it all very clearly. It explains everything that you need to know about the types of monsters, the different actions that you can do, like requesting assistance, focusing your dice, using items. All of it is very well explained. I have yet to find a question that I have not been able to answer by looking through the book, and have had to interpret the rule on the fly just so I could keep the game moving and not having to stop it. The terms themselves are actually very simple. You either move to a new location or stay where you are, depending on what you want to do, and then you resolve that location where you're at, and then you move the clock, and that's it. Now, it can get a little bit complex once you start adding things like adding monsters to the board, which basically gives you more you have to do to resolve the cards, and sometimes you'll have limitations with the Mythos cards that you'll have to remember, and the Ancient One's abilities that you're also going to have to keep in mind, which can make some tasks harder, or basically it just gives you a little bit of extra stuff that you need to keep in mind. But I don't think it adds too much complexity to put people off. Overall, I think this is a very easy game to teach. For the gameplay, I think it is very fun. The one thing that can turn some people off from it is that there is a fair amount of luck in the game, specifically with the die rolls. There is some luck also with how you draw the monsters and how the adventure cards come up and how the mythos cards come up, and depending on what cards come up, you may not even be able to see elder signs for a while, or you may have a ton of restrictions that can inhibit your ability to resolve the adventures at early times. And the monsters themselves could be either very weak, where it only requires a single die face, to being incredibly tough that makes the adventures themselves impossible to beat on the first try. So there is some luck with that, but the biggest turnoff I think will be for some is the die rolls, because the way you try to get elder signs by resolving the cards is through rolling dice, and as dice go, it is random on what you are going to get. But there is a saving grace with that, and that is that there are plenty of ways to mitigate the luck factor for the dice. You can have your own character and other players' characters on that card, and that will allow you to focus dice after a roll or request assistance after a roll, which basically temporarily will lock a die that you need in place, so that way on your next roll you have better odds of trying to have the symbols that you need to complete a task. You also have the clue tokens that can also let you re-roll as many dice as you want. You just set aside the ones you want to keep, you re-roll the rest, and you can do it multiple times as long as you have the clue tokens to spend them on. And that really does drive up your chances of getting what you need. You also have the item cards that can give you some extra dice, the yellow die and the red die, and having those extra dice gives you more chances and more opportunities to roll the dice to try to find what you are looking for, and increase your odds of being able to succeed in the task before you run out of dice. There's even character abilities that, to an extent, can also mitigate the die roll. For instance, Daryl Simmons, the photographer, he can take the investigation of the dice on his turn and increase them by 1. Michael McGlenn, the gangster, can swap a Terra face for a skull face on his turn. Or Mandy Thompson, the researcher, she can have you re-roll 2 dice before you ever get to decide whether or not you are able to complete a task or not. So even though there is a fair amount of luck, particularly with the rolling of the dice, there's so much you can do to manipulate it that I personally think that it won't be too frustrating. Another aspect that can be a good or bad thing, depending on who you are, is the progression of tension through the game. To me, a good cooperative game needs to have a good amount of tension so that you have that feeling of, are we really going to be able to complete this whole mission? Because if you who feel like there is no tension and it's just, oh, this is just completely easy, we're totally gonna win, and that feeling lasts throughout the entire game, then the gameplay ends up being boring. But you also don't want to be it too difficult to where you feel like you're getting smacked around from day one to the point where it kind of would scare you away from the game because it's so tense. And the way this game plays out their tension is that at the beginning of the game, it can feel easy. And especially if you can succeed in the first few resolutions back to back to back. And you're just sitting there like, oh, we got so much stuff, Huff, and we managed to completely avoid everything. We're totally going to win this. But as the game goes on, as the mytho cards come out, and as Doom tokens start getting added to the Ancient Ones card, you start adding monsters to the board. And some abilities of the players start to get shut down. And you start getting restrictions on what you can do with the dice. Some dice even get locked for a certain periods of time. Some monsters will lock the dice. Some mytho cards will lock dice. And so, as the game goes by, it actually starts to ratchet up the tension and makes you start to question, how do we do this? Which is a very nice element to it. But some people aren't going to like the idea of feeling that the game is easy at the start, but then ratchets up toward the end. Some people are going to want a game that really feels tense from the beginning to end. And that could end up being a turnoff to some people. Like I said, it depends on who you are. Apart from those 2 points, however, there is so much I love about this. First off, like I said, the turns themselves are very simple. So turns are not usually going to last too long, which means that the game is going to keep going at a good pace. Now, if you are playing with a mix of new players and experienced players, the pacing can be a little bit off. Obviously, some new players are going to be sitting there really struggling to figure out, okay, so I could go here, and if I go here, I could then maybe discard this one card that'll let me add 1 die here, the yellow die, which could give me better odds here. But maybe I should go over here, because even though that won't give me another sign, this is a lot easier. While the players who know what they want to do and know what they're doing can instantly just go, place, discard, roll dice, done, without even having to discuss what they want to do with the players. So if you are playing this game with a mix of people who know the game well and new players, the pacing for it could be really shifted off. But if you play a game with a group of everybody who knows what they're doing, then the pacing goes very nicely, it goes very smooth. And even if you're playing with a group where you are the only player who knows what is going on, everybody else is new, that is actually not a terrible thing either, because you can help people through their turns and you can keep the game going at a smooth pace. The characters also are a great addition to it. The idea of giving every player their own special ability that only they can use makes everybody much more unique, makes you different from everybody else that's sitting around, and it gives you a very special purpose that you can use to try to contribute toward the team's success. Whereas everybody, if they didn't have a special character, it was just investigator number 1, investigator number 2, investigator number 3, and everyone is just as generic as they get. You don't get that same feeling of, I have something special that I can use to contribute. The player count so far I've found works very well. Full transparency, I've not played with all of the potential options for players yet. The game goes from 1 to 8 players. I've only ever played it solo, 3, 4, and 5, and 5 might have pushed it a little bit on the time limit for me, but 1, 3, and 4 worked very well. The time also can be a bit of a mix. The box says 90 minutes, and depending on the size of the group you're in, you can end up going well beyond that. Like I said, the 5-player game that I played of it was a little bit much for the time, so I would imagine that 6, 7, and 8 would go much beyond that. But like I said, 1, 3, and 4 worked very well. And if you have a good group who knows everything that they're doing, they know what they're doing, then I think you will hit that time limit more often than not with the right number of players. And then the final point that I wanted to mention in terms of the gameplay that I think this game does really well, apart from having some good tension in it, is to also encourage teamwork and encourage discussion. If there is no discussion between the players on what to do or what we think we should do, then how are we working together? From the games that I've played, turn 1 and for the entire game, players are talking to each other. They are discussing what they think they should do. What should I do with my character? Where should I go? Should I just stay here at the entrance sheet because I've got nothing on me? So should I just wait here, try to get some things by searching the lost and found? Or should I maybe go over to this place to try to get some new items? Because it seems very simple. It only has 3 symbols that I need in total. Should I go over to this place to get this elder sign because I have the best odds to do it with these items and with my ability over here? Should I go over here because my ability can increase the investigation, which is what this needs? And all that discussion about what we should do, how should we do this, where do all we go, really just makes that feeling of we are working together seem so much better. And that discussion of where we should do things makes it very cooperative in my opinion. So in terms of the gameplay, I think it is fantastic. In terms of the game providing you with an amount of decisions that you need to make that can impact the outcome of the game. While it does depend a fair amount on luck with how the adventure cards come out, there are times, like I said, where you could end up not seeing a card with an Elder Sign on it for a while, and the Mythos cards could just be springing up bad after bad after bad, and just constantly adding monsters or adding constant Doom tokens to the Doom track. But despite all that, I think the game does provide you with a fair amount of decisions to make, largely in regarding to what you should do on your turn. Like I said, because of the wide variety of the character abilities and the symbols on the different adventure cards, and how some adventure cards can be easier than others, and with all of the monsters that are able to be spawned onto cards, it does offer the questions of, would it be a good idea to go here to get this Elder Sign? I don't have a whole lot on me. Maybe I should just stay back at the entrance sheet and search the Lost and Found for a little bit, try to get some items. Or maybe I should just go to this adventure card. I won't get any Elder Signs, but it does offer to give me some unique items, and that can help me later on. Maybe I should go over here and use this card. Maybe I can get some clues from that. Maybe I should go over here to deal with this monster. I know I can't beat the card, but I can at least beat the monster and make it easier for the next player to come over here and where I am to maybe beat the card without the monster on it because I beat it. So while there is a fair amount of luck in terms of how the cards are going to be drawn for you and how the monsters are going to spawn on you and the results of the die rolls, I do think that the game does provide you with a fair amount of decisions to make that, if you do make the wrong one, can impact the outcome. As for the replay value, there is plenty to go about. For starters, there are 8 different Ancient Ones that you can play against, so that means they're at the minimum right there. You have at least 8 games that you can play through, and there are a whole bunch of different characters that you can play through that you are not going to see the same character twice in a row from game to game. It's very unlikely that you will get a game of Elder Sign where the characters that you play as are identical. Same thing goes with the encounters and the adventure cards. There are so many of them that are in the game that there are going to be some where you will not see from one game for the next few games. For example, the Hedge Maze, you can see that in one game and then not see it again for, I don't know, 5 other games that you play of this. And the order of the Mythos cards that come up, there is going to be some Mythos cards that you will end up in where you will be drawing and adding Doom tokens to the Doom track once every other card. Or you can play a game where the Mythos cards seem to favor you, and instead of just adding Doom tracks to the card, it's just making you lose some items, which is bad, but it is not the end of the world because you can just get those items back, and more importantly, you're not advancing the Ancient One's progression to waking up. So with so many different characters that you'll get different ones each game, 8 different Ancient Ones to play against, the different rooms coming up every single time you play through, and the order of the Mythos cards, there is so much replay value to this. Overall, I think this game worked out really well. The theme, it tried its best, but it's really not there. The components, however, are great. It's not a hard game to learn. The gameplay, I think, works out very well. It has a fair amount of decisions that you can make and excellent replay value, and it all, I think, comes together into a great cooperative game. And I think if you are looking for a cooperative game to add to your collection, I think this is one I would recommend. I'm going to give Elder Sign an 8 out of 10. So those are all my thoughts on Elder Sign. With all that said, what are your thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed the Halloween special, despite the fact that it took me so long to do it, and I apologize for that, but I hope you found some enjoyment in it anyway. If you did, give this video a big thumbs up. If you want to know my thoughts on other games, or if you want more videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more tutorials, reviews, and unboxings. Thank you all as always so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.